My name is Zach Pelko, and today I'll be talking about the French Mutiny, an exercise in patriotism or subversion. For some context, we need to look at the crisis of 1917. At this time, all nations were experiencing a sort of crisis, and this wasn't completely unique to France. There was stalemate on the Western Front, the Eastern Front, and the front in the Alps, and internal strife between and within all nations involved in the war. A.G.P. Taylor expressed the phrase 1917 was the end of European history. He said world history began with new idealist and utopian ideals coming from a worldly context. And in this context, he means the United States and Russia, with Wilson's idealist views on the world, and um, Lenin and the Bolsheviks' view on socialism and communism. He said that these ideas dwarfed the traditional standards of political behavior. However, on a more tangible crisis that came from the battlefield and the results of them was the failure of Nivelle. Nivelle had confidence and promise of a total breakthrough of the German line, and it proved very costly after the Battle of Chemin-des-Dames. Again, same ideas and same results. The constant failure and repeating attacks of the Allies, and especially of Nivelle, became sort of a breaking point of the French army. Happened during the mutiny. Well, the soldiers did not really want to continue fighting. They wanted to continue fighting, but on their own terms. They didn't want to attack, yet they wanted to defend their trench and their nation rather than go over the top and die for nothing. They made a list of demands asking for better trench conditions, food, and reserve rotations, and they wanted to fight a new kind of war, one that doesn't involve the mindless killing of thousands, and they wanted to wait for the Americans to arrive. They took it upon themselves to ask for these demands democratically, as they see themselves bound to the nation by a social contract. They saw themselves. This is the reason why their voice matters. They saw themselves as citizen soldiers. Again, they wanted to make these changes democratically and representatively, rather than violent, like revolts and mutinies that took place in Russia or maybe Germany. The reactions to this mutiny? Well, actually, the generals and officers listened and gave them what they asked for. They gave them the better conditions to work in. However, they imprisoned and executed thousands, and well, they imprisoned thousands, but executed 49 as a way of not seeming like a pushover for the soldiers. How and why did this work? Well, to start off, France is unique. And even though I said before that the problem of crisis was not unique to France, the way they dealt with it, the way the French dealt with it, was unique amongst all the nations. This is a nation born in revolutions. They have a constant memory of the Enlightenment values and the power of the people. They have Republican experience, allowed for civil discourse. NCOs actually acted as representatives from the soldiers to the officers to create a sort of a connection. It wasn't total chaos like the Russian mutinies and desertion. Their willingness to cooperate. Yeah, the acknowledgement of the government that mutiny and strikes were valid. They were mobilized by words, as Ernst Junger stated when he was talking about democracies. He claims that Germany lost the war because they weren't able to fully mobilize. He said that Western democracies were better fit to perform mobilization. In democracies, he said, people were motivated by words, something that resonates with the entire population. Ideas of um, equality, liberty, and fraternity. And this is what he claims that oversaw French victory over German culture. That's something that's not universally known in Germany. And again, comparing and contrasting this with Russia, um, government officials in Russia had no government slash Republican experience. There was no willingness to cooperate, especially with the Tsar regime. They just shot masses of people, and they were completely unmotivated by a unrepresentative Tsar. They weren't enthusiastic to fight as the French were. What was the result of the mutiny? What did they achieve? Well, under George Clemenceau, there was a second mobilization of the country, um, of France. They had a mindset to win the war at all costs. Although Clemenceau totally revamped the French effort in the war, he was just a mere figurehead. As the whole nation was already on board with this idea, he was just kind of the validation that the nation needed to kickstart a second mobilization. The decision to continue was made first and fundamentally at the front by thousands of citizen soldiers of France. Again, reiterating the fact that it wasn't political figures' decision to continue the war. It was the whole nation was already on board with this. However, on the home front, the total war effort means effort by all. However, there were some problems and internal strifes between women workers, left and right politicians, and work unions. Men feared being sent to the front if they downed tools and clashed with women workers about wages and replacement. Strikes by women and then later men workers coincidentally took place during the mutinies, and they got some benefits as well. However, the main takeaway from this is that they all went back to work, went back to the front, and mobilized again to fully contribute to the war effort. However, they wanted total victory. France could not remain France without victory. They had this idea that France needed to win to survive. However, we all know that France had sufficed with an armistice and adopted a more of a pacifist approach to dealing with World War II. So what's the main takeaway from all this? Were the mutinies started to undermine the subversion of high-ranking generals and political officials, or was it the patriotic values that the French mutineers actually had to win the war for France? I think it's the second option, because the soldiers, the war was continued for the survival in France and its identity. Like I said before, France cannot be France without French victory. The mutinies were more about consenting to the war rather than rejecting it. It wasn't a step away from generals and officers saying, we don't want to fight anymore. They wanted a new way to fight this war. And the soldiers kept fighting due to consent with patriotism. This sort of validation that they were intensely identified with comrades and the collective as a whole. And then they fully identified themselves with the war. And this is major because they didn't want to take half measures. They were all in or nothing. And finally, the democratic and republican means of carrying out the mutiny tied heavily into the French national identity. They were able to reach their goal by taking the right steps forward and not falling into complete chaos, just how the Russians did. So, in conclusion, the argument that subversion, compared to the patriotism, I feel is weak, and that the soldiers themselves weren't spiteful, but willing to cooperate with officials to win the war for French survival. Thank you.